Welcome to the Not Just a Pony Ride podcast, presented to you by Hetra University. If you've landed here, you're probably passionate about how horses help people. This podcast is for anyone who helps others experience the benefits of horses or those who have experienced it themselves. If you're in the equine assisted services industry, we're here to help you. If you're here just to learn more, you're in the right place. Welcome to your community of like-minded people where you will hear stories, education, science, and explanations about how what we do is so much more than just a pony ride. And now, from the Hetra campus in Gretna, Nebraska, here's your host, occupational therapist and CTRI, Katie Ott.
Welcome back to part 2 in this awesome series about communication and autism. If you haven't heard the first episode, you will want to go back and listen to that first, because I left a pretty good cliffhanger there on what today's episode will be about. But I have Dr. Darren Olson back. He's a clinical psychologist, and he is here to continue the good advice on how to help participants with autism maximize their experience with our wonderful horses. Enjoy. How do you feel about building in some of that flexible thinking and bringing some of the illogicalness without going too far, obviously, but can you talk a little bit about how that flexible thinking might play in?
You mean like helping the person who wants things to be very logical, very inflexible, sort of helping them get through those difficult times, or when things aren't quite the way that they'd prefer them?
Because things are not going to go right occasionally, right? So how do we help them to get through that?
Right. Yes, you're absolutely right. Our world is not, like I said before, it's not nearly as logical as would be nice if it was. So when that's happening, when there's something unstructured or something has come up that wasn't expected, and now it's like, oh, hang on a second, no, I told you we were going to do that first, but actually we can't do that. Easier said than done, but seeing if you can sort of reinstate some logic to it. So if you just, let's go more extreme, like they're like a full-on meltdown, like it was supposed to be this way, you told me it was going to be this way and it is not this way. I don't like that. So what's the very first tiny thing that you'd like them to do? Is it just standing up? Then let's just focus on the stand up. Let's not focus on all the other stuff that could be happening. Let's not overwhelm. Let's just focus on the next thing that needs to happen, and it's just standing up. And so seeing if you can get down to the absolute basics. I guess I probably should have started with this too, is some sympathy too. Like this, if the person was told that the sequence is going to go this way, or it really is hard on them to shift their attention or shift the way that they're thinking, like that is hard. That is a difficult thing that's going on. So there is definitely a level of, yeah, this is hard. This is hard. So and sometimes it can be okay to allow a few moments, a little bit of like of not introducing anything. So it can feel like it's important to like rub their back or give them a hug or even like say it's going to be okay. For some people, that's more stimulation when they are tapped out and they cannot accept anything else. And when that happens, it's actually better to just sort of take a step back, allow their sort of stimulation level to come down a little bit on their own, and before introducing anything else. So then like, okay, I see you're a little bit calmer, nice deep breath. And then you can kind of talk about some little things to help them. Take in a breath, maybe rub their back, something like that. Okay, let's stand up and help them stand up. And we're just focusing on literally the next step and getting through this, really breaking it down. It kind of goes in contrary a little bit to like the visual schedules and stuff like that. But when it's sensory or it's emotional like that, let's meet them on an emotional level, allow for that to be, and then help them through it.
Yeah, I like to think about a lot of the emotional regulation. We do some emotional regulation and obviously sensory too, but once we get in kind of that state where, you know, we're having a meltdown or we're having this big reaction, I feel like it's good to think about those things in return in terms of like, it's like their brain is having a storm and like they just can't focus on anything else because literally the neural pathways are just jammed with emotions and sensory overload or whatever it is. And so giving them more directions or more words or more touch or more anything can just clog that up even more. And so kind of waiting for that to pass sometimes, you're absolutely right, is the best thing to do sometimes.
Yeah. And I like to tell parents, we all have our limits. We all will hit our max at one point or another, where we simply cannot accept anything else. And I tell parents, think about those times when you are tapped out and someone comes and puts their arm around you and says, like, it's okay. You want to throw that arm off of you and be like, do not touch me. Get away. I need my space, right? Like, so sometimes we're talking about the high end tantrums or sensory overload. Like, think about it like that. Like, if you were in those shoes and you had reached your max, you're actually not going to want someone to give you more. It's actually best to go with less. Allow that to sort of pass. I like what you said, like a storm. Allow the storm to sort of settle down a little bit, and then let's start moving forward. And once the storm is sort of coming down, then, like I said, focusing on the next sort of logical steps. A lot of sympathy. We can't say that enough. Like to sympathize that this is a difficult thing. What is a small piece that can be done to have some kind of success? What's a small thing that can help?
And sometimes I feel like my participants that struggle with that structure, and it's definitely not just those with autism, it's, you know, a lot of my participants, but they struggle with that structure and that I know what's coming next. And then it's almost kind of like almost like control, where it's like, okay, but that's the way I want it, or that's the way it was supposed to be, or whatever. And so sometimes I will, like, this happens all the time. I put trotting at the end of our session as kind of a reward or whatever, you know, and we go for a little trot. Well, there's occasionally times where it's like, you know, you're like, I got 1 minute left and we don't have time for a trot and we gotta go or whatever. And so it's like, then how do you pose that in a way that they still have some control? You're just like, oh, I'm so sorry, you know, we don't get to trot today. But you can choose. Do you want to go over the bridge, or do you want to, you know, go over the ground poles or whatever, like something that will take less time, but they're still getting some control, where they're like, okay, well, yeah, I guess I'll choose this instead, or whatever, where it's something more manageable. You have to think on the fly a little bit harder, but still gives them some element of choosing, I guess.
Yeah, definitely. So giving choices, giving some power back, because we've in those situations, their power is gone, right? Sorry, you don't have a choice. This is something that you wanted, and I, as the instructor, have said you can't have it. Like, the power is gone. So to give a little bit of that back to them, 100%. If you can find ways to say, like, a phrase that can be helpful is not available. So try is not available. And if you could use sort of that language, this option is no longer available, but these options are available. And if you can be consistent with that, like that term, or if you want to use a different term, that can be helpful too, that consistency. But you're absolutely right to turn into something.
I like that, not available, because occasionally, like, I'll get into this then conversation where it's like, we don't have time to trot. We can choose. Oh, we have time. I have time. I don't have to go to this or that. And then you're like, well, but, you know, Smokey needs to get to his next lesson. And then you're having this whole conversation back and forth, where you could just be, like you said, very succinct in saying, like, trot's not available. why? It's not available. So would you like to choose this or this? I feel like that makes it much more packaged.
Definitely, definitely. And that again goes back to that communication. Like this is the least number of words that we can use to communicate. Can't do that.
Mhm.
And that seems to be a good way to go about it, of just saying this one's no longer available. That's sympathy. Sorry, I know that's hard. Like understanding that's not that's not nice. Like that stinks for that. Like you can't have it. Here are the things that are available. And then just like you said, we can do this one or this one. Let's give you some power back. Which one of those would you choose? And you can even, for some, this isn't going to work 100%, and none of it would work 100%. Anything I've said work 100%, but um, even like doubling the trot time or something next time. Like
Mm.
it's not available today, but next time we're going to do it for extra long. Like to say there is a path for you to get what you want. It just isn't going to happen today, unfortunately. So
Mhm.
another tool to use.
I've used that. And then sometimes I feel like people worry that they're not going to remember. Oh, trust me, they'll remember. If that works for them, they will show up next week. And before they even mount, they're going to be like, remember you said double trot time last week? And be like, yep, yep. I finally helped remind you.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And if we've talked about like turning things that are coming from into the ears into the eyes, write it down, even if it's a
Mhm.
sticky note or just something that doesn't seem like it's going to carry a lot of weight, unofficial, to just literally grab a sticky note, a piece of paper or something, and write, okay, double trot time, and then write the date. Okay, here it is. I'm going to put it right here and visually show. I recognize this is hard for you, but this is gonna happen. So again, bring that visual aspect into it.
Yeah, I like that. Do you want to talk a little, since we talked a little bit about kind of how I use trot as a motivator, a little bit about how motivation plays into communication?
Yeah. So motivation it's powerful. The way to think about motivation, this is just cheesy stuff that I think about. Think about motivation like the difference between Mondays and Fridays. Now, Mondays and Fridays are both work days. You probably do the same thing on Mondays as Fridays for your job. Like kids go to school on those days. They feel very different. Why do Mondays and Fridays, even though they're both work days, feel so different? On Mondays, you've gone from something you like sort of downward into a work week. Like the good thing, the weekend is now over, and now I have to do the work stuff. Doesn't feel as good as Friday when you're going, "Ah, I have to get through today, and now I'm going to get what I want, the good thing, which is the weekend. And that's why Mondays and Fridays feel so different, even though they are really the same kind of thing. And so that's how we want motivation. We want motivation to look like Fridays and not Mondays. So always having the motivator come after the difficult thing. It's a lot more difficult to say, like what you said, putting trot last, 100%, do it like that, rather than like, okay, let's get on, let's go have our nice trot, and then let's do the stuff that's not nearly as fun. That's like a Monday kind of thing. That's a
Mhm.
lot, it's a lot harder to take the trot away to move into something that's not so good. Then, okay, we got to get through this difficult stuff, the stuff that's maybe not as fun for you, but you're gonna get that weekend. You're gonna get the thing that you want at the end. Um, as far as other motivators, there are lots and lots of little things that can be done. There's like you can think about um, there are food drink type motivators, stuff that like comes through the mouth. There are social motivators, so high fives, good jobs, knuckles, calling the parents' attention. Look what they just did. There's an element of like stuff that you say or do that can motivate. There's the physical kind of motivator, so actually handing them something. If you have something like, hey, you do this, I'm going to hand this thing to you, like like a toy or something to look at, some kind of sensory thing. So that can be done a little bit more in the moment of like, instead of waiting all the way to the end for the trot, you could, if needed, try to put some smaller things in between to go piece by piece.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's also like privileges, which is what you mentioned with the trot. Like that's an activity, that's a privilege, that's something to do, which is another classification of motivators. And you can use any and all of those. All of them have their benefits, and all of them have like their drawbacks. But thinking about motivators both big picture, like we do all the things, and then we have the big thing at the end, as well as the small stuff, the good jobs, the like tiny pokes. Like I used to do therapy in the home, and there's a little guy who didn't wasn't keen on doing the stuff that I wanted him to do. And if I got him out of his seat, then I couldn't get him back in his seat. But he didn't like high fives, but he did like to give a high one. And so we would tap our index fingers. I'd put out my index finger, and he would literally just poke my index finger and then kind of feel like, oh, that was cool. It wasn't a high five because he wasn't into that big praise, but just a little poke, a high one. And he thought that was cool. So it can be tiny, tiny, tiny stuff in between the stuff that you're doing and the big motivator at the end. And it takes getting to know the kid. There's no this is the way that you do it. Go ahead and think outside the box. Like
Mm-hmm.
if it's a string that they'd like to just dangle around or something like
Mm-hmm.
that, like okay, you get on the horse and you can hang on to the string, and so they just have the little string with them once they're on. You get through getting on the horse, and then you can have the string, and then you have the trot at the end.
I had a
We can say,
participant once that I pretty much nonverbal, wasn't super functional in communication. And so it was hard. I had seen them for quite a while before I, had tried quite a few things. And I'm like, I just cannot figure out what motivates, this child. And so I had the family fill out, I had this motivation survey that I had from I don't know, some class or something I took. And literally it's just a list of like everything you could possibly imagine. And I just asked the parents to indicate, like, is there anything that they've showed interest in, and I'll never forget that there was a section and it was that magazines was on there, and she had indicated magazines. And I was like, she likes to like read magazines, but she goes, nope, she just likes the way the pages feel. And she just likes to flip the pages. And like, I would have ever tried that in a session, and so sometimes it's just something as simple as just, asking the families what, if they could choose anything, they had a downtime, a down minute to do something, they could choose something, what would it be? And so then I use that, and I'll be darned if they weren't the most motivated they ever were. Is that in between the activities I asked her to do, I let her have a minute or, whatever with her magazine, and it was much, much smoother than it was going before. So.
yeah, perfect. And you just hit on like a really key statement when talking to parents about that is if you just left them alone, what would they do? That is a really powerful question to ask families. Like, well, if we just left them alone, they'd probably go do this, and if that wasn't available, those are the clues. Then you can try and take those little pieces, like, well, no, we don't have a video game here, but they, maybe they're saying that they like Mario. Like, okay, well, we can incorporate something Mario-like in this, or like make a Mario voice or something like that. But that question of what would you do if, left to their own devices, what would they do? That really gets at what could potentially motivate the person.
Mm-hmm. How can we be, I guess, the most successful with, getting our participants to do what we ultimately want them to do, which is enjoy the horse and learn how to ride?
Yeah, I one of the most important things coming into working with a person with autism and other special needs, but um, really thinking about the the logic, the logic that is in their brain. And if you can tap into that and realize like, oh, I see why they're having a hard time with this because it was illogical. Like, for example, they could walk in to the stable and like have a full-on meltdown or get really upset, and you're like, what on earth? Why is this happening? And then come to find out they're used to like a certain horse being in one of the stables and it's simply not there. And that was illogical. I walk in, I see this horse, I see this equipment, I walk this many steps, and I see the horse I'm going to get on, and it's not that way.
Mm-hmm.
It's perfectly logical. To us, it's like, whoa, what's happening? Come on, get off the ground. But
Mm-hmm.
in their mind, the logic has been disrupted. And if we can really, really try to see what, where in the process, where in their logical brain has something been disruptive, and sympathize with them above all else, and then see if we can kind of correct it, see if we can prevent it next time, you're well on your way to sort of like this idea of sort of bringing the world to them as they sort of have to adapt to the world. So,
I love the
um,
sympathizing part. That's big for me because I do a lot of emotional regulation. So for me, it's always like validate those feelings, even if it doesn't make sense to you.
mhm,
Gosh, I am so sorry that that happened. That really is a bummer. Like being sympathetic
mhm,
with them instead of just like you said, being like, what are you doing? Get off the ground. Why are you so upset? Like, because that can be kind of your knee-jerk reaction, but to sympathize, like even like get down there with them and be like, gosh, I know this is hard. Like, what are we gonna do? Just being
mhm.
sympathetic can go a long ways.
Yeah, yeah.
I was just thinking the other thing too is that we can do as professionals is trying to become more aware of the things that might be difficult, right? Like I have a participant that does not particularly enjoy when they show up to their session and say their horse was, had to have some vet care done or, something, and it's a different horse today. They still get to ride, they still get to do all the same activities, but the horse is different, and that is really hard. And so what I do is I just ask the horse team, they always let me know when I have a horse change. And then sometimes I'll even take a picture of, oh, we're not riding John today, but we're riding Jim. So I take a picture of Jim and I send it to his mom and I say, just let so-and-so know that we are riding Jim today. And here's a picture of him. And, so you can kind of start to see those things before they happen to help build some of that logic back or.
Absolutely. Yeah. And that's a part that I didn't get into too much. But another big, big part of all of this is prevention. It's
Mhm.
so much better if you can prevent the behavior than having to deal with it in real time. So if you were able to prevent that disruption of you're not going to ride this horse, you're going to ride a different one, you were able to prevent the shock of that by sending it beforehand.
Mhm.
That will always be the best intervention to prevent rather than have to deal with it in the moment. So the more you can get ahead of this stuff, the better. You won't always be able to. We all would love to be superheroes and be able to see the future, but it's just not the way that's going to go. But if you can prevent, try that first. Then you don't
Mhm.
have to deal in the moment with a difficult behavior or a big time letdown for the participant.
Right. And I think that's a big kind of delineation too that we make a lot is having like our instructors, their job is to learn how to ride the horse and enjoy the horse and that type of thing in their sessions. And so the more prevention we can do with those any kind of behavior, anything like using those schedules, using all of those tools to help prevent those things so that they can ultimately learn what they come to do is key. And then for us on the therapy side of things, it's like I'm going to prevent everything that's, major and happening, but then I occasionally might, poke the bear a little, or, I might remove something or do something different where I can work therapeutically on those things, but always preventing them first and then adding them if we feel like they can, tolerate it. But that's kind of the delineation that I like to make between in being an instructor and being a therapist is we're not asking instructors to work on, these things really specifically or therapeutically, but rather, like you said, preventing so that we can learn and be successful, right?
Perfect. Yeah, very well said.
Yeah, it's, I think, sometimes hard, especially when you're in a center or a barn that has both, which is good, because then if you have somebody that is, you feel like as an instructor, you feel like has more needs, then you can, have tips in your toolbox, then you have therapists there that can help you. And I would just kind of add as to that is, if you're an instructor that's listening, and you have a participant that has some higher needs, find a therapist, find somebody in your area that, either specializes in working with like a child psychologist, just like Darren, or a occupational therapist, or somebody that can help you troubleshoot some of that, because it can be hard. How did you get involved in some of the equine side of things, Darren? Did you just know somebody, or have you consulted with someone at a therapeutic riding center?
That's a great question. This all I got plugged in with this community when I was like before COVID. I was a new psychologist at Children's Mercy, and just trying to get my name out there as much as I could. And there was a regional conference, Path International regional conference that was coming up. They reached out to Children's Mercy and said, could anyone come to our regional conference and talk about autism? And being brand, I hadn't been at Children's Mercy very long, so I was like, yes, absolutely, I'm going to take anything I can take to sort of establish myself. I'm going to take it. So I went and I did the presentation, and they, they loved it. They thought it was really good information, and then they encouraged me to see if I could present at the international one, or the national conference, which got delayed multiple times because of COVID. But in between that time, I've continued to sort of stay as best I can, sort of stay plugged into this community, because it's a nice I guess intersection between like general like autism type stuff that I do, and like I said, I do like a lot of parent training, and this is very similar to sort of that parent training, but it's a very specific type of intervention. And so I've tried to read up and sort of keep myself connected and keep myself fresh in this area. By no means am I an expert. I've probably said some stuff that like, well, it's not exactly like that, and I
no, you did great.
That's okay. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. But that's sort of the way it came to be.
Yeah. Obviously you do, but I guess you can talk a little bit about it. But because you are a guest that we've had on our show, that we don't have a ton, but a handful of professionals that come on to speak in their area of expertise that aren't necessarily directly in our field. So I guess as someone who is I would say like an external professional, do you, believe or see the benefit in the work that we do?
Oh, definitely. Definitely. There's a lot of benefits in I can't, because I like you said, external, I have a hard time putting the words onto it. The connection that you offer with an animal, and of course there's the skills, there's the stuff that you can get in other places, like the nuts and bolts. It's taking that nuts and bolts, those skills, and putting more a flavor of emotional connection that you can have with an animal, that is different than the stuff that I do, the stuff that's done in a lot of other places. That combination of skills based, the stuff that you can quantify, and the deeper connection, I guess. See, again, I just don't have the words, being being an external person.
Those
But
are all
that
the right
I think. Okay, good. That's the piece that it's that intersection that I feel like doesn't isn't offered in very many places. Like, you can have a therapy that's like, okay, let's take care of your behaviors, let's teach you things, like it's kind of cut and dry. We can count these. And then there's like strictly like emotional connection, a parent just sitting down and reading a book with their kid. Like there's that human sort of piece to it. There aren't many places where those two things come together like like this community in
Mhm.
the therapeutic horseback riding and stuff. So I find that pretty amazing, and so that's why I've tried to like keep myself connected to this community because I think it's really cool work that you're doing.
Well, thank you for being a part of our community, Darren. You are just an awesome, awesome guest. I learned a lot today. I know that our listeners will too. And having more medical professionals in our corner and that see the benefits and recognize it. I mean, that's all we could ever ask. And we need more of folks like you that believe in what we do to keep spreading the word about us. So we appreciate you.
Of course, yes. Again, happy to come on, happy to help, and I've really enjoyed this time.
All right. Well, before I let you go, I end my podcast with a question or a wrap up every time. In this season 3, the question is, if you could give yourself, your professional self, any advice, your young professional self advice, looking back on it, what would you give?
So I've thought about this. So there's the advice that I'd give, and then there's like, how would I make myself believe that? That's the part I don't know. So what I would tell my young professional self, is you have to do the hard things. If I could tell myself anything, I would try everything to get my young self to believe you got to do the hard stuff. You have to do the things that are going to make you uncomfortable. You have to do the things that other people aren't wanting to do. Not because it's just a good thing, and not like trying to be noble or anything like that, but because even in the difficult things, even if you fail, it's the learning that takes place that you don't want to miss. That's like, I almost like feel emotional when I think about talking to my young self, but it's that learning, those learning opportunities, you don't get them all that often. And so sometimes to back away from a difficult situation or a difficult opportunity and say, no, that's too hard, I can't do that right now, that's a missed learning opportunity. Even if you were to fail at it, that learning will be beneficial down the road. So if, like I said, I don't know how I would ever convince my young self that that was the case, but if I could, that's what I'd want a young professional me to know.
Yes, that's beautifully said. That's something that I am trying to tell myself right now as well. And I think us as therapists and instructors can look at that in a much, smaller way too, in that even if our participants are having a bad day, even if they're having a difficult time, something happens, it's an opportunity for us to learn. If not them, you learned more about that participant that day. And if that's all that you learn, then that's a win. I mean, you can do something better the next time. And that's, I think, a hugely positive note for us to end on.
Absolutely. I completely agree.
All right. Well, thank you, Darren. I wish you all the best in 2023, and don't be a stranger. Come to Nebraska and visit us at Hetro. We'd love to have you.
All right. Yeah. If I'm up that way, I might reach out and see if we could, connect.
Come observe. Yeah. All right. Well, thank
Yeah.
you and have a good day.
All right. Thank you. You too.
Thanks for listening to another episode. Until the next one launches, stay connected to our community by joining the Not Just a Pony Ride Facebook group. There, we share exclusive educational content, answer your questions, and review new and exciting developments for the EAS community. Don't forget, if you have suggestions for future episode topics or a lead on a great guest that you think our audience would enjoy, click on the link in the show notes or visit us at hetrauniversity.org. This podcast is presented by Hetra University, an educational arm of the Heartland Equine Therapeutic Riding Academy. Hetra University's mission is to provide high-quality educational offerings to our participants and the EAS community. If you'd like to help us work toward our mission, you can make a donation by visiting us online at hetra.org. Again, I can't thank you all enough for helping Hetra change lives one stride at a time.